When I woke up in that hospital bed, the first thing I felt was cold. Not the cold of snow or winter, but the kind that settles deep inside you when you realize someone you trusted chose to walk away. I turned my head slowly, expecting to see my sister's face. But the chair beside my bed was empty. The nurse told me I had been unconscious for almost a full day. She spoke gently, like she was afraid her words might break me. I nodded, even though my head hurt and my body felt heavy, like it no longer belonged to me. What hurt more was not the broken bones or the surgery scars. It was the silence. The silence where my sister should have been Dot. Welcome to Auntie Rose Narrates. Before today's story of betrayal and self-discovery, please subscribe and hit like to help these stories be heard. Drop your city or country in the comments. It always warms my heart. Now let's begin. My name is Emily Carter. I was 28 years old when my life split into two parts. The part before the accident, when I still believed family would never abandon you, and the part after, when I learned how wrong I was. I had been driving home that night through heavy snow, the kind that blurs the road and makes the world feel smaller. I remember gripping the steering wheel and thinking about nothing important at all. Just dinner, just tomorrow, just normal life. Then the headlights appeared in my mirror. Too close, too bright. Dot after that, everything became sound and motion and fear. Metal screaming, glass shattering, my car spinning, and then nothing. They told me later that a black SUV stopped on the road above the ravine, that someone got out and stood there for a while, looking down. That someone was my older sister, Lauren. She watched, she waited, and then she made a choice. She did not stay with me. She did not ride in the ambulance. She did not sign the hospital papers. She left my purse at the front desk like it was a forgotten item, and she disappeared. 5 days later, when I was still weak and learning how to breathe through the pain, Lauren came back. She walked into the hospital wearing a beautiful coat and a loud voice. She demanded to know where I was. She acted afraid. She acted shocked, and that was when the nurse looked at her and said one sentence. Just one. A sentence that made my sister freeze where she stood. That sentence would change everything for both of us. I grew up in a small town outside Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where the winters were long and the snow seemed to cover everything in a quiet gray blanket. Our house was modest, a 2-story brick home with a small porch and windows that fogged in the winter, but it always felt warm inside. Mom and Dad worked hard. My father, a school teacher, spent his days grading papers and coaching the local basketball team, while my mother ran a small catering business from our kitchen. Even as a child, I could feel the rhythm of their love. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, like the hum of the refrigerator at night, always there, always reassuring. I have an older sister, Lauren. She was 3 years older than me, always confident, always moving faster than I could keep up. In school, she was the one with friends, the one with leadership roles, the one everyone listened to. I was quieter, more careful, always observing from the sidelines, learning, calculating. Despite our differences, we were closer, at least I believed we were. She protected me when I needed it, teased me when I deserved it. And somehow, in our childhood, she managed to make me feel safe in a world that sometimes felt bigger than I was ready to face. Our parents were proud of both of us, but they relied on Lauren in ways that sometimes left me feeling overlooked. She had a presence that demanded attention and natural command of a room, while I quietly absorbed, watching, listening, and learning. I loved her deeply, more than I could articulate, even when I sometimes wished she would notice me just as much. Our childhood was filled with simple joys, snowball fights in the backyard, long summer nights catching fireflies, and late evenings in the kitchen, where Mom taught us how to make pies and pasta from scratch. I can still smell the warm bread in those moments, the aroma of vanilla and cinnamon mingling with laughter. High school was a turning point for both of us. Lauren thrived academically and socially. She made friends easily, joined clubs, and eventually earned a scholarship for college in Chicago. I stayed closer to home, working part-time at a local bookstore, quietly pursuing my own path. Despite the physical distance that college created, Lauren and I kept in touch. We called each other weekly, texting updates about small victories, little disappointments, and the occasional funny story about our parents. I always thought of her as my anchor, the one person who could understand me even when I didn't speak. After graduation, I moved to Milwaukee for a job at a marketing firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I liked the rhythm of my life. I rented a small apartment downtown, close enough to the office to walk in the morning, and spent evenings cooking dinner and reading on my balcony. Lauren's career had taken off in Chicago. She worked in public relations for a high-profile company and often traveled, her life full of meetings, events, and dinners that I could only imagine. She seemed to thrive in the spotlight, while I preferred quiet dinners and weekends at the park. Family gatherings were always interesting. Mom and Dad adored seeing us together, even when the differences between us were obvious. At Thanksgiving, I would watch Lauren charm relatives, effortlessly drawing stories and laughter from everyone in the room. I would sit beside her, smiling and enjoying the warmth, feeling proud of her and yet quietly aware of my own role as the observer. Dad would glance at me, his eyes soft, and say, "Emily, you've always got a good eye for the little things." I'd nod, feeling seen in a way that mattered quietly. Not loudly. Lauren and I had a complicated relationship as adults. We were close, but there were unspoken tensions, small disagreements, misunderstandings, and moments of jealousy on both sides. I sometimes felt overshadowed by her confidence, her decisiveness, the way she seemed to navigate the world without hesitation. And yet, I loved her fiercely, believed in her implicitly, and trusted her completely. I never imagined that trust would ever be questioned. Romance entered my life gradually. I met Jason, a soft-spoken man who worked in architecture at a cafe near my office. He was patient and kind, someone who listened before speaking, who noticed details most people overlooked. We started slow dinners, walks along the lakefront, conversations that stretched late into the night. I felt safe with him, grounded in a love that was steady and calm. Jason and I dreamed together, often talking about a future where we might buy a small home, maybe even start a family one day. Lauren approved of him, smiling at me when we talked about long-term plans. "He's good for you, Em," she said once, squeezing my hand. "He really is." That was Lauren, direct, perceptive, and somehow always seeing more than I thought I did. Life felt balanced, predictable in a comforting way. Work challenged me, but didn't overwhelm me. Family was a source of warmth despite small disagreements. Lauren and I continued to text and call weekly, sharing victories and failures, laughing over shared memories from childhood. I remember one particular night lying in bed with Jason beside me, scrolling through pictures from a holiday dinner at Mom and Dad's house. Lauren had posted a photo of us all together. I smiled at the image, noticing the way Lauren's hand rested lightly on my father's shoulder, the way Mom's eyes crinkled with laughter. I felt a surge of affection, of belonging, and whispered to Jason, I wouldn't trade this for anything. Winter came early that year, heavier than usual, with snowstorms blanketing the city for days. I had always loved winter, the way snow soft edges and slowed life down. Driving could be treacherous, yes, but there was something magical in the quiet hush that fell over streets and trees. I remember feeling a certain peace that December evening, the world muffled under a layer of white, the air crisp and still. Jason had been away on a work trip, and I was driving home from a friend's small gathering. I was tired, yes, but content, safe, unaware of how quickly that sense of safety could be stripped away. Lauren had called me earlier that day. "Don't forget the snow's coming," she warned, her voice carrying the usual mix of care and authority. "Drive carefully." I laughed and promised I would, assuming, as I always had, that her words were just sisterly advice, not a prelude to what was to come. In hindsight, that conversation took on a way I could never have imagined at the time. The evening started normally enough. I left my friend's apartment around 8 p.m., bundled in a thick coat and scarf. The streets were slick, the snow falling steadily, but my car handled it fine. Music played softly in the background, my thoughts wandering from work to the next day's plans. I remember taking a curve carefully, the tires crunching over ice, and feeling the subtle vibration of the road beneath me. It was ordinary, uneventful, almost comforting in its normality. I remember glancing in the rearview mirror, seeing the reflection of streetlights bouncing off the snow, and then headlights appeared. Too bright, too close. My heart skipped, my fingers tightened around the wheel. I pressed the brake, expecting the familiar resistance, the car slowing as it always did. But it didn't stop. It accelerated instead, hurling me forward toward a guardrail I hadn't expected to see so suddenly. I screamed, a sound that felt hollow even as it left my lips, as the car smashed through metal and dropped into darkness. Snow, ice, pain, and fear all collided in an impossible instant. And then silence, when I later learned that Lauren had stopped to watch, to assess the wreck before calling for help. I was shocked. Not because of the accident, not because of the danger, but because someone I loved, someone I trusted above all else, had chosen to leave me in that moment. It was a betrayal I could not have imagined in my worst fears. The realization settled in slowly, like the cold that seeped into my bones that night, a quiet, heavy weight that would follow me into the days ahead. After the accident, life seemed to stretch out in a slow, painful rhythm. Recovery wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, the kind that seeps into every quiet corner of your day. I spent hours staring at the ceiling in my hospital room, listening to the soft hum of machines and the occasional shuffle of nurses outside the door. The pain in my body was constant, but the ache in my heart was sharper. Lauren's absence haunted me. Every time someone mentioned her, I felt a hollow pit of disappointment. A cold realization that the person who should have been closest to me had chosen to step away at the exact moment I needed her most. The first few days were disorienting. I was groggy from medication and the aftermath of surgery, but I could hear whispers and hushed tones in the hallway outside. Friends from work visited, offering flowers and cards, their faces soft with sympathy. Jason came every evening, bringing small gifts, a warm scarf, a cup of tea, a paperback novel he thought I might enjoy. He didn't speak much, just held my hand when I needed reassurance. And yet, even with Jason there, the absence of my sister felt like a missing heartbeat. When Lauren finally returned, 5 days later, her entrance was dramatic, as if she had walked onto a stage and expected an audience to gasp at her appearance. She wore a luxurious coat, hair perfectly styled, and a bold expression of worry plastered across her face. She demanded to know where I was, shouting my name in the reception area. "Where is Emily?" she cried, slamming her hand on the counter. The nurse looked at her with an icy calm that I could feel even from my hospital bed. And then came the words that froze Lauren where she stood. Words that would haunt me and perhaps haunt her forever. Lauren's return should have been the moment of reconciliation, the turning point where we could rebuild. But instead, it felt like a wall had gone up between us, thick, cold, and insurmountable. I could sense the tension even before I spoke to her. When the nurse finally led her toward my room, Lauren's eyes flickered with guilt, then defensiveness, then something I couldn't quite place, fear, maybe, or shame. The hallway was silent except for the soft tap of our footsteps, and I noticed for the first time how tall and commanding she seemed, even when she wasn't aware of it. When she saw me, she froze. I was weak, bandaged, and pale, but alive. Alive, despite her choices. "Emily," she whispered, voice trembling slightly. I looked at her, trying to gauge what was behind those eyes, but I found only layers of emotion I didn't yet understand. I didn't know what to do," she said finally, almost pleading. But the words fell flat, heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. I didn't know if I wanted to forgive her or just understand why she had left me there at all. The days after her return were filled with quiet tension. Lauren visited sparingly, her presence polite but strained. I could feel her hesitation in every movement, the way she avoided eye contact, the careful way she chose her words. I wanted to ask her why, to demand an explanation, but I didn't. Part of me still hoped she might tell the truth without me prompting it. Part of me also feared it, knowing the answer might change everything between us permanently. At home, Jason and I tried to rebuild some sense of normalcy. He insisted I rest, insisted I eat, and quietly manage tasks I could no longer handle on my own. Friends and colleagues called and texted, offering support and encouragement. Yet, no matter how carefully I tried to reassemble my life, the memory of the accident lingered. The image of Lauren standing over my wrecked car, watching rather than helping, haunted me during quiet moments late at night, early in the morning, and in flashes when I least expected it. Lauren and I began to have small conversations, carefully measured, polite, but never truly honest. "I was scared," she said one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know if you'd make it. I panicked. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to reach out and pull her close, to tell her I needed her now more than ever. But another part of me, the part that had felt abandoned, whispered that her fear had been self-serving, that it had been about her and not me. The tension didn't stop there. Our parents visited, of course, but even their presence seemed tinged with quiet unease. My father would glance at Lauren with a mix of concern and disapproval, his hands shaking slightly as he held his coffee cup. My mother would place a gentle hand on my shoulder, smiling softly, but I could see the worry behind her eyes. There were whispered conversations in the kitchen when I wasn't around, conversations I couldn't hear but could feel through the atmosphere of the house. And through it all, Lauren seemed to shrink and expand at the same time, apologetic and proud, guilty and defiant, all within moments. Small misunderstandings began to pile up, like snowdrifts building against the sides of a house. A delayed text from Lauren, "Hope you're feeling better," felt distant, cold. A comment about the accident, framed as concern, felt accusatory. I began to notice her body language, the way she crossed her arms, the way she avoided sitting too close to me, the way she often glanced at her phone as if searching for an escape. I realized that the sister I had loved unconditionally might be someone I didn't really know at all. One afternoon, Lauren arrived unannounced at my apartment. I wasn't expecting her. Jason was out running errands, and I was wrapped in a blanket on the couch, trying to read a book that I couldn't focus on. Lauren stood in the doorway, coat dusted with snow, and smiled hesitantly. "Hey," she said softly. "Mind if I come in?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door, to tell her she had no right to be here. Part of me wanted to hold her, to hear her apologize, to hear her admit that she had been wrong. I stepped aside, letting her enter. We sat in silence for a long moment. The only sound was the soft ticking of the wall clock. I brought something," she finally said, placing a small box on the coffee table. Inside was a scarf, hand-knit, soft and warm. I touched it gently, feeling the weight of the gesture, the care behind it, and yet I couldn't shake the memory of those 5 days alone. I wanted to ask, why didn't you call? Why didn't you come? But the words caught in my throat. Over the next few weeks, the tension between us continued to grow. Family dinners became exercises in politeness rather than connection. I noticed Lauren's subtle criticisms of my choices, what I wore, how I arranged my apartment, the way I spoke about work. She didn't do it loudly, didn't make me feel attacked in the moment, but I felt the sting, the slow accumulation of judgment that made me question myself. I had always admired her, trusted her, loved her, and now I felt unsure whether I could continue to do so. Even Jason noticed the change. One evening, as we sat quietly at home, he said, "Emily, you've been so tense around Lauren lately. It's like you're waiting for something." I nodded, looking down at my hands. "I guess I am," I admitted. "I'm waiting to understand why she left me. I'm waiting to see if she really cares." He reached over, taking my hand gently. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," he said softly. "Just breathe. One step at a time." His words were a balm, but they couldn't erase the questions in my mind, the unease that had settled into the spaces between us. Then came the subtle arguments, small but cutting. Lauren would offer advice in a tone that felt superior. I would respond politely, keeping my words measured, but inside, a storm was brewing. I found myself replaying every interaction, wondering if I had misread her, if she had always been like this, or if something about the accident had changed her entirely. The weight of betrayal, even partially acknowledged, began to cloud every memory of our shared childhood. One evening, Lauren suggested we go shopping together, trying to recreate some semblance of normal sisterly bonding. I agreed, cautiously hopeful, but it didn't take long for old patterns to resurface. She criticized my choices, too plain, too boring, not fashionable enough. I tried to laugh it off, make light of it, but the comments lingered, like snowflakes landing softly and then melting into cold reality. "You always were the careful one," she said at one point, a faint smile on her lips. "Maybe too careful?" I felt my stomach tighten, realizing how much her words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they came from someone I had trusted completely. Arguments didn't explode. They simmered, quiet but persistent. Misunderstandings built walls between us. She would call, then hang up abruptly when I didn't answer fast enough. I would text, then wait hours for a reply. The small gestures of love we once shared were replaced by caution, hesitation, and a quiet tension that seemed impossible to break. And yet, beneath all of this, there were moments of softness. I caught her looking at me when she thought I wasn't noticing, eyes filled with something unspoken. She would offer a gentle smile or an unexpectedly kind word, only to retreat moments later into defensiveness or pride. I realized that Lauren herself was struggling, grappling with guilt, fear, and perhaps her own self-preservation. It was a complex tangle of emotions, and I was left wondering where I fit in that tangle. And if I ever would again. The tension reached its quiet peak one snowy afternoon. As I sat by the window, drinking tea and watching the flakes drift lazily to the ground, Lauren arrived, unannounced again, and leaned against the doorframe. "Emily, can we talk?" she asked, voice low and tentative. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. We spoke carefully, exchanging words that were measured, polite, yet full of unspoken questions. I asked nothing, hoping she might finally explain herself. She said little, then paused, eyes dropping to the floor. The room was heavy with unspoken truths, and I felt the weight of our fractured bond pressing against my chest. And just as I thought we might finally find a moment of clarity, the phone rang. The nurse's voice on the line reminded us both that the hospital still held pieces of the past we hadn't addressed. Lauren's eyes flickered with tension, and I knew, even then, that the story was far from over. Something deeper, something more painful, was waiting for us both, and the next chapter was coming whether we were ready or not. I didn't know it then, but that day marked the beginning of a reckoning I couldn't avoid. Lauren's choices, my trust, and the fragile threads of our family were all on the line. What would happen next would change everything, forcing me to confront the truth about the sister I thought I knew and the person she had become. The day it happened, the sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the wind carried a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I was home, resting on the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket, trying to focus on reading a book Jason had given me. The words blurred, my mind drifting instead to Lauren, her sudden, unpredictable visits, her tense smiles, the way she skirted around the truth. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking, that maybe she had reasons I couldn't understand. But deep down, I knew the truth was much darker. Lauren arrived that afternoon, her knock soft, almost hesitant. When I opened the door, she stepped inside with a careful smile, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. I thought, maybe these would cheer you up, she said, her voice unusually quiet. I looked at her, feeling a mixture of hope and suspicion. I wanted to trust her again, to believe she was sorry for what she had done, for the 5 days she had left me alone in the hospital. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker, almost imperceptible, that made my stomach tighten. We sat in silence for a while, sipping tea. She talked about mundane things, work, mutual friends, the weather. I nodded along, trying to stay present, trying not to let my thoughts spiral back to that night, the crash, the cold, and her absence. I wanted to believe she was genuinely here to connect, to reconcile, but the tension was palpable. Every time she glanced at her phone, I felt a prickle of unease. Every time her voice softened, I felt the weight of words unsaid pressing down. It wasn't until she reached for my hand that I realized the breaking point was coming. Her fingers brushed mine lightly, and she said, "Emily, I never meant for things to happen like that." I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Her voice cracked, but before she could finish, I saw it. The small, almost imperceptible hesitation in her eyes. That pause, the fraction of a second where she looked away, broke something inside me. I pulled my hand back gently, my voice trembling despite my effort to stay calm. "Lauren, you didn't just panic. You left me. You left me there, alone." Her face went pale, and she opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. She shifted uncomfortably in the chair, twisting her hands in her lap. I could see the conflict there, the desire to explain, to justify, and the instinct to protect herself at all costs. I realized then that this was no simple mistake, no momentary lapse. This was a choice she had made, a deliberate decision, and it was a betrayal that cut deeper than anything I had ever known. I tried to keep my voice calm, measured. "Do you have any idea what it felt like? To be in that car, to feel everything spinning, to think, maybe this is it, and you were there, and you didn't help. You watched." My words hung in the air, heavy with accusation and grief. Her eyes welled up, but she still didn't speak. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could feel the years of trust unraveling, one thread at a time, and I realized that I might never see her the same way again. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. I didn't know what to do. I thought I was helping. I called for help eventually. The words sounded hollow, rehearsed, and I felt the familiar ache of disappointment settle in my chest. "Eventually?" I repeated softly, almost to myself. 5 days is eventually, Lauren. 5 days is everything. She looked away, and I could see the shame in her posture. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the chasm between us, but another part of me recoiled, angry and hurt. You didn't even stay at the hospital. You didn't check on me after the surgery. You tossed my purse at the desk and walked away. Do you have any idea what that meant? The tears came then, quietly, rolling down my cheeks. As I spoke not with anger, but with the deep, cutting sorrow of betrayal, Lauren's own tears fell silently, but I could tell they were more about herself than about me. She had never been confronted like this, never had her actions weighed against the pain they caused. I realized then that this confrontation was not just about the accident. It was about the years of subtle competition, the quiet misunderstandings, and the unspoken judgments that had always simmered beneath the surface of our relationship. And then it happened, the moment that would change everything. Lauren reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. She hesitated, then placed it gently on the table in front of me. I need you to see this, she whispered. My heart pounded. I looked at the envelope, instinctively knowing it held the truth, but dreading what I would find. I picked it up, my hands shaking, and slowly opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printed message from the hospital front desk, the very nurse who had spoken to her 5 days after the crash. I read the words aloud, my voice shaking. Your sister, Emily Carter, is under protective care. Any inquiries must go through hospital administration. She survived, but any interference could jeopardize her recovery. My eyes lifted to Lauren's, and I saw her freeze. The confident, assertive sister I had known was gone, replaced by someone smaller, fragile, terrified. She had thought she could manipulate the situation, control it with her presence or absence. And she had been confronted with the reality that her actions had consequences far beyond her understanding. Lauren's lips trembled, and she tried to speak, but I held up my hand. Don't say anything, I whispered. Just see what you've done. I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, relief, and a deep, gnawing need for answers. I realized that the betrayal wasn't just in her leaving me at the hospital. It was in the choices she had made, the cold calculation she had hidden behind a mask of concern. And now, faced with the undeniable truth, she had no words, no excuses, no defenses. We sat in silence for what felt like hours. The room seemed smaller, heavier, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the weight of our shared history and the fracture that now lay between us. I could feel the distance of years, of assumptions, of trust broken, stretching infinitely between us. Lauren's face was pale, her eyes wide and unblinking. I could see the terror of realization, the sudden understanding that the world she thought she could control had slipped through her fingers. Finally, she whispered, barely audible, "And I didn't know it would be like this." I shook my head slowly, tears still streaming. You had 5 days to see me, to be with me, to care for me. You chose not to. That choice defines more than a moment. It defines who you are, Lauren. My voice was calm, but the weight of it pressed against the air like a storm cloud. I could see the understanding dawning in her eyes, the recognition that she had crossed a line that could not be easily erased. Realized then that the turning point was not just the accident itself, nor the betrayal of her absence, but the reckoning, the moment when truth becomes undeniable, when actions can no longer be hidden, and when the consequences of choices manifest fully. I felt a strange clarity, a cold, piercing awareness that our relationship would never return to what it had been. And yet I also felt a flicker of something else, a possibility for honesty, for understanding, for the slow, careful rebuilding of trust. If we could navigate the wreckage together. Lauren sat quietly, staring at her hands. I knew she was wrestling with her guilt, her fear, and perhaps a dawning comprehension of how fragile life and family really were. I didn't reach for her. I didn't speak further. I simply let the silence do its work, allowing both of us to feel the full impact of that moment, the full weight of the choices we had made, and the consequences we could not undo. And then, just as I thought the tension could not grow any heavier, Lauren whispered something that made my blood run cold. I thought it was the right thing at the time. Her words were almost lost in the quiet of the room, but I felt them like a physical blow. I realized in that instant that the real challenge wasn't just facing her absence. It was confronting the mind that justified it. The mind that believed watching me suffer could be excused by fear. I looked at her, steadying my voice, steadying my heart. Lauren, fear doesn't excuse betrayal. Not ever. Not for 5 days. Not for a second. She flinched at the weight of my words, and I knew that the fractures in our bond had deepened beyond simple repair. And yet, somewhere beneath the sorrow and the anger, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope that truth, no matter how painful, could eventually lead to understanding. I didn't know it yet, but that envelope, that single piece of paper, was only the beginning. What came next would force us both to face not just the choices we made, but the family, the love, and the trust that hung in the balance. And in that reckoning, nothing would be the same again. After that day, the house felt different. The familiar warmth of home had been replaced by quiet tension, the kind that whispers in empty rooms and echoes down hallways long after voices have gone. I spent hours alone in my apartment, wrapped in blankets, staring at the soft glow of the winter sun through the frosted windows. It wasn't anger that occupied my mind as much as sadness, the heavy, slow kind that presses on your chest and makes ordinary tasks feel monumental. I replayed Lauren's words over and over, the envelope, the nurse's message, her hesitation and fear. And through it all, I began to understand something fundamental, the truth. No matter how harsh can be the first step toward healing, Jason stayed by my side during those weeks, his presence a quiet anchor. He didn't try to fix the pain for me. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply existed beside me, a steady hand on my own, a soft voice reminding me to breathe, to eat, to take one day at a time. I realized that love, real love, wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was the small, unnoticeable gestures, the cup of tea made just the way you liked it, the hand lightly resting on yours in a moment of vulnerability, the patience to let someone work through their pain without rushing them. Through Jason, I learned that while betrayal might shatter trust, support and care could help rebuild the pieces of a fractured life. Lauren's visits became more tentative, less performative, and gradually more honest. One evening, as snow fell lightly outside my window, she sat beside me, hands clasped tightly in her lap, voice soft and almost hesitant. "Emily, I can't tell you how sorry I am," she said. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now. I was wrong. I should have been there. Her words were quiet, simple, but they carried a weight that only truth can bear. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not just my sister, but a human being grappling with fear, guilt, and her own limitations. I realized that forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was a slow process, a willingness to see beyond the hurt and recognize the complexity of those we love. We began to talk, not as sisters attempting to return to the past, but as two people trying to understand each other in the present. I asked questions, small but necessary, about that night, about her choices, and about what she had felt while I lay in that hospital bed. She answered honestly, sometimes with tears, sometimes with silence, but always with a humility I had never seen in her before. And I listened. I listened not to judge, not to punish, but to comprehend, to allow myself to process the enormity of what had happened and the depth of the betrayal I had endured. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration where old patterns of defensiveness emerged, where I felt the sting of her words or her hesitation. But with each conversation, each quiet evening of shared reflection, the walls between us began to shift, imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably. I realized that healing doesn't erase the past. It simply allows you to carry it differently, with awareness and choice rather than pain and resentment. Our parents noticed the change too. The house gradually returned to a gentler rhythm. Conversations that had once been polite but strained began to flow with ease. Dinner at the table was no longer a minefield of subtle tensions. Mom would glance at us, eyes soft, and Dad would smile quietly, sensing the slow repair of a bond that had been tested to its limits. I felt a warmth that hadn't been present since before the accident, a sense of belonging and family that seemed fragile yet precious. In the quiet moments, I reflected on my own journey as well. I realized that part of my suffering had come from the expectations I placed on others, the belief that people will act according to my understanding of love and loyalty. Life doesn't always conform to those expectations. Sometimes people make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are devastating. But in confronting them and facing the truth, there is a chance for growth, for empathy, for understanding, and even for forgiveness. I felt a strange gratitude toward Lauren, not for what she did, but for the lessons her absence and her choices had forced me to learn. One day, as I looked out at the snow falling softly over the city, I thought about the accident, about the 5 days I spent alone, and about the envelope, the nurse's words, and Lauren's frozen face. It was tempting to dwell on anger, to let bitterness take root, but I chose instead to see it differently. I chose to see it as a turning point, a moment that demanded courage, honesty, and reflection. I chose to accept that some relationships are fragile, and that repairing them requires effort, patience, and understanding from both sides. Lauren and I began to share more than just explanations and apologies. We began to share memories, small, ordinary ones from childhood, moments of laughter, times when we had supported each other without realizing the significance. Those moments reminded us that beneath the betrayal and hurt, there was still a foundation of love, still a bond that had been tested but not completely broken. We began to rebuild trust, step by cautious step, acknowledging the past while cautiously embracing the future. It wasn't linear. There were setbacks days when I would feel the sting of betrayal all over again. Days when Lauren would retreat behind her defenses, but each setback was smaller than before. Each time we spoke, we listened, we acknowledged the pain, and slowly, the heaviness of the past began to lift. I realized that forgiveness is not a single act. It's a series of choices made again and again to see the humanity in someone you love, even when they have caused you pain. I also realized that trust must be rebuilt through action, not words alone. Lauren began showing up in ways that were thoughtful and consistent. She visited without dramatics, helped with errands, offered support without needing acknowledgement. She let me see the sincerity in her gestures, the effort she was making to repair the damage she had caused. And in turn, I allowed myself to respond with openness, with cautious hope, and with the willingness to believe that people can change, at least when they choose to confront their mistakes honestly. In those weeks, I found my own strength. I began to take walks in the park again, letting the cold air fill my lungs, feeling my legs strengthen with each step. I returned to work part-time, reclaiming the rhythms of normal life, reconnecting with friends, and finding joy in small, everyday moments. I understood that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about living fully again, despite the past. And slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. One quiet evening, Lauren and I sat together by the window, the snow falling softly outside. We didn't speak much at first, just shared the comfortable silence that comes when two people are cautiously rebuilding a relationship. Then she said, "Emily, thank you. Thank you for letting me try, for letting me make this right." I looked at her, tears brimming, and smiled softly. "Lauren, we're still learning, but we're here. That's what matters." And in that moment, I felt the fragility of life and family, the weight of mistakes, and the quiet beauty of choosing to try again. It was during these moments that I began to understand the full scope of forgiveness. It wasn't about erasing the past. It wasn't about pretending the betrayal hadn't happened. It was about allowing myself to see Lauren as she truly was, a flawed human being capable of mistakes, just as I was. And it was about choosing to move forward with compassion, clarity, and the cautious hope that bonds, once fractured, can heal over time. And yet, even in this fragile reconciliation, a part of me remained alert. I knew that trust, once broken, must be rebuilt carefully. Every action, every word, every gesture mattered. I realized that healing and forgiveness were ongoing processes, not destinations, and that the accident, the betrayal, and the long days of fear had left indelible marks on both of us. But for the first time, I felt we were moving towards something genuine, a connection that, though scarred, was real. But life has a way of testing even the strongest resolve. Just when I thought we were beginning to find peace, a new revelation emerged, one that would challenge everything I had rebuilt, forcing me to confront not just Lauren, but the family, the love, and the trust I had fought so hard to preserve. What came next would show whether forgiveness could truly survive the shadows of the past. Winter finally began to soften into spring, and with it, a sense of quiet renewal settled over my life. The snow melted slowly, revealing patches of green grass and buds just beginning to appear on the trees outside my window. It felt symbolic, somehow like the slow thawing of the tension and pain that had filled the past months. Sitting on the couch one afternoon, a warm cup of tea in my hands, I reflected on everything that had happened. The accident, Lauren's absence, the betrayal, and the long journey toward understanding and forgiveness. It had all changed me. I realized that life is fragile, that trust is precious, and that love, even when tested, can endure if we approach it with honesty and care. Lauren and I no longer spoke as if nothing had happened. Our conversations were honest, intentional, sometimes tentative, but filled with a shared commitment to move forward. We laughed quietly at childhood memories, reminisced about small moments that had once seemed insignificant, and acknowledged the pain we had both carried. It wasn't perfect, and perhaps it never would be, but it was real. And in that reality, there was a profound sense of connection, of family, and of the possibility of healing. Jason remained a constant presence, his calm and steady support reminding me that love doesn't always have to be loud or dramatic. It can be quiet, patient, and enduring, the kind that allows you to rebuild even when everything seems broken. I felt gratitude for my own resilience, for the support of those who truly cared, and even for the lessons I had learned through pain. I understood now that suffering can teach us empathy, that betrayal can teach us boundaries, and that forgiveness can be an act of strength rather than weakness. Began to see Lauren differently, not just as the sister who had betrayed me, but as a human being capable of mistakes, remorse, and growth. And I began to see myself differently as well, realizing that my worth is not defined by others' choices, but by my own capacity to endure, to reflect, and to heal. Life is unpredictable, I thought, and sometimes cruel, but it also holds the possibility of redemption, understanding, and hope. Even the most fractured of relationships as the sun filtered through the windows. Warm and gentle, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. I knew the journey wasn't over, that there would still be challenges and moments of doubt, But I also knew that the foundation we were rebuilding of honesty, trust, and care was strong enough to hold us through the days ahead. And in that knowledge, I found comfort. Life, I realized, is about choosing to move forward, even when the past weighs heavily on your heart. It's about embracing those we love, forgiving when possible, and finding hope in the quiet moments. And as I sat there, watching the world slowly awaken outside my window, I understood this. Even after betrayal, even after pain, warmth and love can return if we are brave enough to let them in.